This study was about the impact of district academic achievement on the employment status of school superintendents in a southern state. The purpose of the study was to give stakeholders insight into the importance of academic achievement in relation to the involuntary change in continued employment status of superintendents. There were 6 research questions asking what differences existed in academic achievement for both reading and math between school systems where there was involuntary change versus continued employment, involuntary change versus recent change in the employment status, involuntary change versus voluntary change, incumbent winners when there was an election versus incumbent losers, an elected situation where there's continued employment versus appointed continued employment, an elected involuntary change versus appointed involuntary change. Literature review basically stated that there were 3 conflicting roles for the superintendent: instructional, managerial, and then of course political. While the literature does support an increased emphasis and shifts towards focusing on student achievement, there's been past difficulty in finding a link between student achievement and superintendent tenure that can be objectively measured. Of course, then the McRail study came out, the meta-analysis that indicated that both district-level leadership and superintendent tenure both have a positive correlation with student achievement, thus supporting the belief that sound leadership at the district level adds value to the educational system. And this, of course, was authored by Waters and Marzano. I later found 4 studies after the McRail study that also looked at student achievement and relationship to superintendent tenure. That was Meyer's study in Kansas, Kaplan's study in New York, both that confirmed the same findings as McRail, the Metcalf study in Indiana, which also confirmed it but showed a weak relationship, and then Alsbury's study in 2008 in Washington, where no relationship was determined. In fact, turnover in smaller districts was preferred over stable leadership. The literature also talked about place-bound versus career-bound superintendents. Place-bound superintendents are those that are selected when school boards are looking for stability and maintenance of the status quo. Place-bound superintendents prefer to avoid conflict rather than resolve it. And Alsbury concluded that considering the proclivity for small school superintendents to protect their position by avoiding conflict, it is sometimes not surprising that a long-term superintendent may have a negative influence on student achievement. When it came to the literature review talking about superintendent actions to increase student learning, there was no single initiative in and by itself that could be pinpointed. Rather, many different effective practices that took place. This was shown by the Newble study in 2001 in Ohio. And basically the McRail study talked about when the right work was done the right way, student achievement existed and was related to superintendent tenure. This research should be of great benefit to both superintendents and school boards as it demonstrates the importance of both hiring and retaining a strong superintendent. Now, superintendent turnover has been viewed as problematic, and the literature does support a historic decline, basically declining from 14 years, but the mean seems to be about 6 years now. Oftentimes we hear in the media that this, Landry talked about the revolving door superintendents that is sometimes portrayed in the media, but basically Metcalf's numbers and many of the numbers that are out there talk about how this is actually a skewed number and that actually 6 years is the mean, which is more than often is reported in the media. Kowalski reported that 51% plan to still be a superintendent in 2015, suggesting that about half plans to retire, so there should be a substantial turnover by 2015. So the research does indicate that older and more place-bound superintendents will be in that position. In the southern state where this research was conducted, the data related to superintendent turnover was more alarming when compared to the national trends. This state has 77% of its superintendents with less than 7 years of experience, compared to the nation with 60% with 8 years or less experience. This state had 3% of its superintendents with 15 or more years of experience, compared to the nation having 25% with more than 13 years. And Lockwood reported that from 2003 to 2010, and based on 132 school systems in this state, the Superintendents Association had assisted 138 new or interim superintendents for 92 systems. Only 33 had the same job they had 7 years ago. Only 50% are still in the job 4 to 6 years after being hired, 20% 7 to 9 years after being hired, and only 5% after 10 years. The number seems to indicate that 71% left their position voluntarily, while 27% left their position involuntarily. So this has to do also with the influence of politics. Fullen stated that due to the complex nature of executive leadership itself, there was always someone who was dissatisfied with the leader's performance. And Metcalf stated, every superintendent is one election away from losing his or her job. Landry also supported this by saying, regardless of their accomplishments in the school districts, superintendents have become political scapegoats. Elected superintendents are relevant to this study as it has a definite impact on the superintendent tenure, especially now that there are only 3 states that have elected superintendents: Alabama, Florida, and Mississippi. And really, regardless of the political process, the research indicated that both, whether elected or appointed, that political activity is involved in these decisions. The impact of superintendent turnover is relevant. McKay and Grady described a cycle of dismissal, search and selection, reorganization, mid-dismissal again as a huge obstacle for school districts to overcome to improve student learning. And Trevino stated that turnover is in large part due to the challenge of the position and that longer tenure is needed so that long-term positive influences can occur. The one thing that was predominant in the literature regarding longevity was that there was a relationship building and working with people. Carter and Cunningham in 1997 even mentioned that superintendents are not really evaluated against criteria in their job description, but more according to a sense of whether or not the superintendent is doing a good job and has a good relationship with the school board and or community leaders. So the reasons provided in the topics discussed for successful tenure and longevity are far removed from the main goal of the superintendent, which is actually improving student learning. So in looking at involuntary removal, the literature is consistent in not identifying student achievement as a main reason. Therefore, the review of literature supports our need to refocus on the issue of superintendent tenure related to involuntary turnover and its relationship to student achievement. Now, in this study, the methodology, the existing conditions were job continuation records from the superintendents from the academic years 2004, 2005 through 2010 and 2011, and school district academic achievement data from 2005 through 2010. The dependent variables were the district academic achievement for both reading and math. The independent variables were the employment status of school superintendents from the school years 08-09, 2009-10, 2010 and 11. And while the study focused on superintendent changes during those 3 years, it included a database of the previous 4 years to determine if the employment status of the superintendents was continuous over that time, over those 4 years, or if there had been a change in the past 4 years. District academic achievement results were recorded by analyzing the percentage of students who scored at level 4 in reading and math on the state test. The reading and math percentage scores were calculated to show 3-year trends of the state in each school system for 08, 09, and 010. The study examined superintendent changes during the academic years 08, 09, 09, 10, and 10, 11. Therefore, the 08, 09 academic year, the reading and math scores from 2005 to 2008 were used to show a 3-year academic trend. The 09, 010 academic years used the reading math scores from 2006 through 2009, and 10, 11 academic year used the reading and math scores from 07 to 10. The researcher created a database that combined dependent variables, independent